Hello there and welcome to the weekly Outside Views report on American politics. Canada wants to send Ukraine 200 more armored personnel carriers. This was announced by Canadian Defense Minister Anita Anand during a visit to Kiev on Wednesday. The armored personnel carriers will be purchased by Canadian company Rochelle and will be valued at around 90 million Canadian dollars. That's part of a roughly $500 million military aid package announced by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in November. The vehicles referred to in the armored personnel carriers are constructed for the transport of an infantry group, casualties or ammunition, and are only lightly armed. Since Russia's war of aggression began almost a year ago, Canada has already provided Ukraine with more than 1 billion Canadian dollars worth of military aid, including the delivery of an anti-aircraft missile system and anti-tank vehicles. Former US President Donald Trump has been fined nearly $1 million for a lawsuit against Hillary Clinton. Trump shows an enduring pattern of court abuse and filed the lawsuit to dishonestly advance a political narrative. That's what Judge John Middlebrooks said on Thursday. In the lawsuit, which Middlebrooks dismissed last year, Trump accused Clinton of attempted fraud in the 2016 presidential election. He accused his then rival of wanting to convince the public that he had cooperated with Russia in his election campaign and demanded $70 million in damages. Clinton lost to Trump in the 2016 presidential election. The lawsuit should never have been filed, is what Middlebrooks said in the court order. Its inadequacy as an appeal was evident from the outset, and no sane attorney would have filed it. That's what the judge seriously wrote. Trump is a sophisticated litigator who repeatedly uses the court to take revenge on political opponents, he said. Trump and his attorney Elena Hubbard were sentenced to a total fine of almost $938,000. After the attack on Brazil's government district, the capital's former security chief and ex-justice minister has been arrested. Anderson Torres, who was fired as head of security for the federal district of Brasilia after the riots last week, was arrested there on Saturday at the airport after arriving from the U.S. state of Florida. That's what the National Police said. The Supreme Court had issued an arrest warrant against him on suspicion of omissions and toleration in connection with the riots. Supporters of the right-wing ex-head of state Bolsonaro stormed the Congress, the seat of government, and the Supreme Court in the Brazilian capital Brasilia on Sunday. They rioted in offices and boardrooms, causing extensive damage. The security forces brought the situation back under control hours later. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva accused parts of the police and military of collaborating with the attacker. Bolsonaro lost to the left-wing politician Lula in the runoff last October and left office at the turn of the year. Even before the election, he had repeatedly cast doubt on the electoral system without presenting any evidence. Well, he learned a lot from his buddy boy Trump there. So far, he has not explicitly acknowledged his defeat even. 2 days before the end of his term on New Year's Day, he flew to the United States with his family, to Florida, by the way. The Supreme Court announced investigations into Bolsonaro on Friday. According to media reports, Torres returned to Brazil last week Saturday from the U.S. city of Miami. He had been Justice Minister from March 30th in 21 until the end of Bolsonaro's term, after which he resumed his previous post as Brasilia's security chief. Governor Ibanez Rocha fired Torres on Sunday and was himself suspended by the Supreme Court on Monday. Smoking is banned now in many places in Mexico. In addition, tobacco products are no longer advertised. So in many places in Mexico, smoking will no longer be allowed in public spaces. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador ordered this by decree. This affects beaches, parks, sports facilities, amusement parks, courts, markets, and prisons. In addition, the country prohibits all forms of advertising, sales promotion, and even sponsorship. The new rules have been in effect since Sunday, so yesterday. Anyone who violates this must expect a fine of 46 to 157 euros, as reported by the AFP news agency. The smoking ban has been sharply criticized by the Employers Association Copa-Mex because of possible economic damage. Numerous teachers and other civil servants, as well as pensioners, have demonstrated in the South American crisis country of Venezuela for higher wages and pensions. This call, which teachers originally started, grew into something bigger, wrote the Venezuelan newspaper El Nacional on Monday. To a large demonstration attended by all the public sector unions in the country. Photos showed a demonstrator putting chicken feed in a pot to draw attention to rampant poverty. Our salary is a pittance. It's not enough for anything. What we get every month is a mockery, quoted El Nacional, a teacher at a public school in the capital Caracas. Inflation in Venezuela rose to more than 300% last year, according to estimates by independent financial experts. The country, ruled by authoritarian President Nicolás Maduro, has been in a deep political, economic, and humanitarian crisis for years, despite one of the largest oil reserves in the world, which was exacerbated by the corona pandemic. The health system is on the ground. According to statistics, more than 7 million people have left Venezuela because of poverty and violence. During protests against the Peruvian government, demonstrators and police officers in the capital Lima have fought serious clashes. The government opponents threw stones and firecrackers at the police officers. The officers fired tear gas into the crowd, and that all could be seen on television on Thursday. According to a report by radio station RPP, the demonstration tried to penetrate the Congress. Several people were injured in those clashes. In the center of Lima, a building went up in flames. More than 25 fire brigade units were on duty to prevent the fire from spreading to neighboring houses. That's what Fire Brigade Commander Mario Casaretto told RPP. The fire was out of control, he said. It was initially not known whether there was a connection with the protests. The protests are directed against the government of interim President Dina Boluarte. In a speech in the evening, she called on the protesters to engage in dialogue and announced the consequences for those who want to create chaos and disorder, as she puts it. The demonstrators are demanding the resignation of the head of state, the dissolution of the Congress, and the release of the imprisoned ex-president Pedro Castillo. The former village school teacher wanted to forestall a vote of no confidence in December and just dissolved the Congress. Parliament then removed him from office. He was arrested on charges of an attempted coup and is in custody. Thousands of people came to Lima on Thursday under the motto Toma de Lima, take Lima. Mainly from southern Peru they came. There were also violent protests in other parts of the South American country, though, not only in Lima. In the city of Arequipa, 1 person died and 10 others were injured, according to the state ombudsman office. Dozens of people have died in Peru since the protests began in December. A court in Nicaragua has found Catholic priest Oscar Danilo Benavides Davia guilty of conspiracy to undermine national integrity. But that's not the only crime he's accused of. The judges in Managua also convicted him of spreading false news. According to a report in the daily newspaper La Prensa on Monday, the public prosecutor's office is now demanding 8 years in prison for the cleric. Benavides is the first Catholic clergyman to be convicted of a series of imprisoned anti-government priests who the Sandinista regime still wants to put on trial. The most prominent prisoner is the Bishop of Matagalpa, Rolando Alvarez, who is still waiting for a date for his trial. According to media reports, he declined the offer to go into exile. Nicaragua has been experiencing a serious domestic political crisis for years. Around 350 people were killed and thousands injured in nationwide protests against the leftist Ortega government. Nicaragua's church, non-governmental organizations, and independent media have repeatedly and harshly criticized the government's human rights violations there. More than 1,300 non-governmental organizations have now been banned. Managua's auxiliary bishop, Silvio Baez, is in exile after receiving death threats. In view of the increased persecution of critics, the USA and other American states have strongly condemned the human rights situation in Nicaragua. According to a statement by the Organization of American States, or OAS, on Friday, the authoritarian government of Daniel Ortega is increasingly pressuring critical voices, including journalists and representatives of the church. In the search for government documents, investigators came across other secret documents in the private rooms of US President Joe Biden. The US Department of Justice seized 6 documents with confidential markings from Biden's home in Wilmington in Delaware. Biden's attorney Bob Bauer said this on Saturday. Some of it came from Biden's time as vice president, some from his time as senator. The almost 13-hour search had already taken place on Friday and included all work, living, and storage rooms in the house. The White House is meanwhile trying to limit the damage after it was recently criticized for its information policy. Because in the past few weeks, confidential documents have repeatedly appeared in Biden's private rooms in Delaware as well as in Washington. The public only found out about some of the finds when the media reported about them. Attorney General Merrick Garland hired a special prosecutor to investigate the incidents. Biden's lawyer now emphasized that the investigators had unrestricted access to the house during the search on Friday. All kinds of documents such as handwritten notes, files, folders, memorabilia, task lists and schedules, some of which went back decades, were made available to them. Biden himself made it clear on Thursday that he was fully cooperating with the Justice Department. The revelations are politically extremely sensitive for the president because it is not allowed to store confidential government documents privately after leaving office. The National Archives are responsible for this in the United States. The first tranche of confidential government documents was discovered on November 2nd, shortly before the US congressional elections. And this concludes this week's report on American politics, and I'll see you in my next video tomorrow. I'll be back.